As he stated, I'm from Minnesota, and we have been working with rural mental health for a number of years, and we are actually looking to expand it also, which is a great thing. We have collaboration from the Department of Ag and from Extension and from Farm Business Management, and all of those agencies are really helpful in having us have a program like we have. One of the things that the last speaker used the word mental health, and I was so pleased with how he used the word mental health, as in mental health. Not when we say mental health, we mean mental illness, but mental health meaning mental health. Every one of us can be healthier, every one of us. And that should be the goal of every one of us, to be mentally healthier. Somehow along the line, people have started identifying mental health as mental illness and saying, I'm not that crazy, so I shouldn't have to see someone. I shouldn't have to talk to someone. And that's a sad state of affairs. We are all in need of mental health, every one of us. And there is no such thing as being healthy enough. We should be looking at that as always finding ways to be happier, healthier. So mental health means just that, mental health. Now, what's the difference between farm mental health and urban mental health? In 1993, I was working with the flood program for FEMA. And after a year, a farm business management instructor called me and said, well, do you work with farmers? And I said, well, of course we work with farmers. We work with everyone. You know, the whole state was affected. And then I looked and I noticed that I had a total of 0 phone calls in 1 year from farmers, 0. And so he asked me if we would work with some of his farmers, and that's really how my program began. It started off as, well, they're obviously not going to call you. Now, I would like to ask everyone in this room how many times they've heard a farmer say, hold on a minute, I have to call my psychologist. Doesn't happen. So we have to figure out how to work with them, how to get to them, how to hear what they have to say. Farming is different in a ton of ways. One is that it isn't an occupation. It is a way of life. So when you talk about threatening farm, you're talking about threatening their way of life. What will they do if they don't farm? That is so scary to many farmers that they simply will keep farming until there is absolutely no options left and someone says, you have to get off the farm. Because it is a way of life. And we need to hear that, and we need to understand that, and we need to stop correcting them by saying, you know, you could, blah, blah, blah. Because that is not how they think. We have to understand their way of thinking if we're going to help them, and not the vice versa. They don't have to understand ours. Now, is there a shortage of mental health people in rural America? Absolutely there is. What can we do about it? Well, for one, we need to understand that we have to go to them. We have to be part of their belief system. When people talk about me, they call me Ted, period. And the reason they do is it's more comfortable. I wear golf shirts, I wear jeans, and it's all because farmers like golf. No, that's because I like golf shirts and jeans. And it fits me. So my comfort level is important, so is theirs. Now, what do you think the biggest change in farming has been in the last 5,000 years? What is the biggest change in the last 50 years over 5,000 years? Women. Women, it's the biggest change. Now, I want you to look at the audience here. At least 50% women in this room. If I was before this group 50 years ago, how many women do you think would be in here? None. So on farms, it is the same. Farm communication is an interesting thing because for 5,000 years, what was the role of women on the farm? To do everything inside the farm and to raise little farmers. That was their role. And the role of the man was to do everything outside the farm. Now, women do the books and women work off the farm. Now, what happens when women do the books? What happens?
They're done correctly.
Who said that? Stand up. Now, besides them doing it correctly, they developed this thing called an opinion. You couldn't have an opinion on something you didn't know anything about. So if husband comes home and says, I just bought a $750,000 combine, and she says, oh, it's because she doesn't know what that means. But now she looks and she says, why couldn't we get a cheaper one? Why couldn't we get one next year instead of this year? Why do we need to get a new one? Couldn't we find a used one? Now, prior to that, that never happened. Those arguments were never there. So it's this generation that's dealing with that, and they can't look back on their moms and their great-grandmothers and say, how did you do it? Because they didn't do it that way. So there's a lot of arguments that go on simply because we haven't learned yet how to work together. But we're getting better at it. And one of the best things that can happen is to understand that two heads are better than one. If you're working together to make the farm healthier, that's a good thing. But it isn't an easy thing. How many of you know farms where there's more than one person in charge? There is the farmer and his helpers, right? How do you think it works if women now are working off the farm, and as I said earlier, it's a way of life on the farm. So now women are working off the farm. What do you think happens? Women come home after working all day. They want to talk about what they do also. Who listens? Because the husband wants to talk about the farm. Does that create stress? Ooh. Creates a lot of stress. Now, do I have a right to my opinion? Do I have a right to what I think? Do I have a right to my work? Absolutely. But the farm is the farm is the farm is the farm, which creates a whole lot of stress because it's new, because we haven't done it before. Ironically, we need to communicate more now than we ever did before on the farm, and we have less time. Some of you older folk here remember when the best thing about the harvest was the 4 meals you had brought out to you by the lady folk. Now, the youngest one goes in and gets 100 hamburgers, 100 fries, and 100 orders of shakes because she's working in town. Things have changed. Things are difficult now. Things have changed, and It will be for the better, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of listening and a lot of listening skills. In 1993, when I first started working with farms, there were probably 10–15% of women that I would deal with. Now it is literally 50–50. So working together becomes crucial. Now, how do we do that? How do we do that? In rural areas, mental health, psychiatry. In urban areas, there are usually enough psychiatrists, and people can go to them and actually do mental health things and the psychiatry. What I see far too often in rural areas is if they see a psychiatrist, they see them for 5 minutes, 7 minutes. And what are they there for? They say, how are you sleeping? And your answer is based on, do you need more drugs, less drugs, different drugs? How's your stress level? Again, the question is based on, do you need more, less, the same? And that's their function. I don't see a problem with that, except then they don't see mental health counselors. And if they don't see mental health counselors, all they're doing is over and over and over for how long? Well, if they're not working on their issues, how is that going to change anything? So we need to work together. And a lot of times, we have to work with general practitioners because there aren't psychiatrists in the area, or they're too hard to get to, or they cost too much. So I'll let you in a little secret. Here's what I do. I know a lot of physicians in the area and in the state of Minnesota, and if I feel like a person needs to get on meds, I tell them to go to XYZ doctors, the ones who like to prescribe meds. And if I don't think they need to, I tell them to go to ABC doctors because I know no way in hell will they do it. Now, is that cheating? Yeah. But it's the best I can do. So, stress on the farm. Let's talk a little bit about suicide. And frankly, I'm really tired of talking about suicide. I would much prefer talking about what can we do to prevent them than what do we do with them. The media loves to talk about suicide, people who are successful. For every suicide, there's 25 attempts. And yet, what do we see in the newspaper? Only the suicides, never the attempts. More women attempt suicide than men. But more men die from suicide because they're better at it. They use weapons. Media, a lot of times, wants to talk to me about that. How bloody is it? What did you see when you went to their home? What I want to talk about is how do we get them to talk and do something so that doesn't happen? And I want everyone in this room to understand that if we're working with people and we turn them to the left instead of them going to the right, we may have stopped a suicide. We don't know that because they won't know that. Now that sounds kind of boring to a lot of people, but the fact is, working with people and helping them go in a healthier direction is a heck of a lot better than doing nothing. And I have a friend here who will answer this question for me. What do people do when they don't know what to do?
Nothing.
Nothing. So we have to figure out what we can do. One of the problems in rural areas is who brings out the divorce papers? Sheriff's Department, right? Who brings out land disputes? Sheriff's Department. Who comes to tell us there was a car accident? Sheriff's Department. So who do I call when it's someplace away from my area and I can't get to them right away? Sheriff's Department. Why? Because for one, they'll go there right away, and they will take care of that situation as best they can. So I use the Sheriff's Department because they are a great resource. I use clergy, I use social services, I use extension, I use farm business management, I use whoever I can think of to help. Department of Ag in Minnesota is awesome. Commissioner in Georgia was just here, so I have to say he's awesome too. Now, we have to work together on these things. Doesn't mean we have to be experts. It means we have to do something, because if we do nothing, we are part of the problem. And why do we do nothing? Because we don't know what to do. So, know who your Sheriff's Department people are, who the clergy is. Talk to your clergy. Talk to your social service people. Talk to them and say, what would happen if? Now, let's say you call and say, I'm concerned about this person, and I think they might commit suicide, and it turns out it wasn't true. Embarrassing, huh? So for 3 or 4 minutes, you're a little embarrassed and you were wrong. Now let's say you're right, and you've just saved a life. So 3 or 4 minutes, maybe you're embarrassed a little, or you were right and it saved a life. Seems to me the balance is pretty easy to look at. Now, why is it so easy for farmers to commit suicide? Well, one, isolation. Now I'm gonna surprise you here and tell you something I know none of you knew before. Men and women don't think alike. So, when men feel stress, they generally pull away. And the higher their stress level, the more they pull back. Women want to talk. So the more they want to talk. If you're isolated and women are talking to you and you don't want to hear it, you're pulling back further and further, and eventually she's going to say, fine, you know, I've tried, and I've tried, best I can do. Meanwhile, he is by himself on the farm, not talking to anyone, pulling back further and further and further. Bad things happen. A lot of people who attempt suicide have told me they truly believed that the world, their family, the farm would be better off without them. They believe that. So what I say to people who talk like that is, would you be better off if your wife killed herself? Do you think your kids would be better off? Do you really believe that people are better off? Because we don't think very good. We are not focused on who we are. We're focused on something else. And if we're isolated, we program ourselves to believe that more and more and more, and then we act on it. Again, not a healthy thing. So taking care of ourselves becomes really important. Now, I want to talk to you too a little bit about taking care of yourself. Somewhere along the line, someone once said that if you take care of other people, they'll take care of you. I am here to say, and forgive me for using these big words, but crap. If we take care of ourselves, we have the ability to take care of other people. If we don't take care of ourselves, how do we have the ability to take care of anyone else? So when I use the words be nice, I'm referring to be nice to yourself. The nicer you are to yourself, the more you understand yourself, the more healthy you become, the better you are with everyone around you. So be nice. Now, farms tend to have a little bit of anger. Once in a while, prices are bad, anger goes up. How many of you know that anger by itself does not exist? There's no such thing. So if you look at anger and you say, why am I angry? I'm not going to be angry anymore. I'm going to work on my anger. But you don't know where that anger came from. What happens? You do the same thing over again. So remember, anger comes from a soft emotion. Our feelings are hurt. We're jealous. So if we feel anger, we need to look at what emotion triggered that anger. Because if we don't, we'll go through the same things over and over and over and over. I like to tell people that when you get angry, drop your IQ 50 points. My wife says she's still smarter than me. Now, it is hard to tell anyone that you can't get anything done in an argument while you're in it. What happens when husbands and wives argue? At some point, the two are arguing, and one of them gets up to leave. Which one do you think it is? The male. Right? And he gets up to leave, and which one do you think follows him out saying, I'm not done with you yet? And why is that? It's because we go through the same arguments over and over. We never get them resolved, and needs to be resolved. So one thing I always recommend is that you look at, okay, if we're not going to talk about it now, when are we going to talk about it? When can we talk about it and have a time? What's the best time? Breakfast? Next day? Whenever? Anger also creates more anger, and on a farm, when things go bad, things get worse, things get worse, things get worse. It builds higher and higher and higher, and we explode. Now, is there anybody in this room that has ever been really angry and just before they blew, they calmed down? No. And why not? Because before we get to that point, we justify our anger. We justify what is going to happen next, which is an explosion. Now, what do we do after it? We apologize, we say, oh, we shouldn't have got so mad, blah, 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 blah. And then we do the same thing all over again later because we didn't look at what caused it. How did I justify it? Because everyone in this room has been angry, justified their anger, and after it said, I shouldn't have got so mad. I don't know why I got so mad. So focusing on that can help. And again, in rural areas, it's all the more important because who do we turn to? In a lot of rural areas, there's just us. Something else I want to point out as far as farm goes is we have been looking forever at farm help through the kids and how that work is. Chores. Chores. Now, on a farm, every time I talk to a group of all farmers and I say, how many of you did chores? They all raise their hand and think, what a stupid question. And then, when I say, how many of you liked it? There's always a couple of brown noses that raise their hand, but for the most part, nobody does. When they're done with that, I say, how many of you are glad you did them? Again, everybody raises their hand. So, why is it that it's a good thing? Any of you think that work ethic is caused by a good philosophy on life? Work ethic comes from work. If we don't learn how to work, we won't be teaching anyone else. And on a farm, when kids aren't doing chores, they're not being taught a work ethic, are they? So, how did farmers get to know their sons and daughters? Chores. Because if they weren't doing chores, the dads and moms were, so how could they have gotten to know their kids? So chores is a really important part of farming, and it's not supposed to be something that you like. It's something that you need to do because it's part of the farm, and everybody needs to be involved because it helps everybody. It doesn't mean everybody is happy because they have to do them. Show me a manure pit somebody likes. So working together is incredibly important on a farm. And it's the way we get to know each other. How dads and moms get to know their kids is because they work together. Which brings up something I like to talk about as far as adolescence. How many of you have had adolescence or still have adolescence now? Okay. How many of you were adolescents at one time? How many of you forgot when you talked to your kids that you were adolescents at one time? It's absolutely amazing how as parents we think that somehow the rules changed and they don't think the same way as we did. I've always noticed that if your son or daughter comes home and says, you know, I'd like to go to a party Friday night. What's our first question? Is there drinking? As though they'll say, well, yes there is, but we ask the question, don't we? And when they answer and we know that they're not telling us the truth, we spew forth this wisdom. I remember when I was a kid, there was a car accident. I remember this happened. I remember that happened. I remember all those things. And we give them all this great advice, and they're listening like crazy. And why are they listening? Because they think when you shut up, they can still talk you into going to the party. We forget we were adolescents. They're not bad guys because they think that. They're adolescents. Just like we were adolescents, and just like we did the same kinds of things. I remember my dad saying, the whole time I was growing up, I remember my dad saying, I hope someday you have one just like you. He didn't get lucky though. My kids are a lot better than I ever was. So when we look at our adolescence and when we focus on those things, remember that when you're 13, you know everything, right? And then when you're 14, you didn't know much when you were 13, but now you do, right? And then when you're 15, you didn't know much when you were 14, but now you do. And so on, until you become an adult and you go through the same things over and over. That's when you grow up. So we can't have expectations of kids thinking as adults because they can't. They've only had 13-year-old experience, so they know what 13 is like. We are the adults. We know what 13 is like at 14, 15, and 16. So we need to remember who the adults are and make decisions based on that. Now, getting back to farm and farm women, which I really think is an incredibly important factor. The divorce rates, when I first started working with farmers in 1993, far lower on farms. Now it's absolutely 50-50. Things have changed drastically on farms. Women work off the farm for the wrong reasons oftentimes. If you enjoy your job, awesome. But if you're working off the farm so you can pay your insurance, or you're working off the farm so you can help pay down the debt, what a horrible thing to have to do. And our spouses need to recognize that. They need to know how hard that is and what you go through and what it's like not to like a job. Would anybody in here rather work 8 hours a day at something they hated or 10 hours a day at something they truly loved? So we're not talking about the number of hours. And think of what it's like to absolutely change your personality. Get ready to go to work and go into town to do a job that you don't want to do, and maybe even look a way that you don't want to look, just so you can help the family farm and then not get recognition for it. Not be identified as a truly important person. How much stress is that? Talking about stress in general, we also tend to think that our emotions are not our key, it's logic. So I'm going to give you a logic. Be happy. Anybody in here disagree with that? So how come just because I said it, nobody got happy just because I said it? What we have to understand is my emotions, my feelings are unique. And I have to deal with me and my feelings. And if I'm sad and I talk to someone about how sad I am, what do I need them to do? Listen. Not give me advice, not fix me, not tell me anything. Any of you in here, when you're really feeling stressed and you want to talk to somebody, really want them to say, well, you know, you probably could do this, or have you thought of that? Every time people do that to you, what do you think? Shut up. I have something I want to tell you. I don't want you to fix me. I want you to listen to me. I want you to hear me. I want you to feel something I feel and not fix me. So listening is really difficult for a lot of people. And if we're listening to someone and they talk to us for 5 minutes and we hear something, we think we have an idea about what to say, we stop listening. We wait for them to shut up so we can tell them what we just thought. To which they will roll their eyes and say, shut up. If they don't say it, they think it. So we need to understand that listening skills is listening. My wife taught English for 37 years. What do you think the worst occupation for listening is of all occupations? Teaching. Why? What do teachers do? They tell you, right? And if they don't like what you have to say, you tell them, too bad, I'm the teacher. So teachers don't listen well. They have to really work at learning how to listen because it's not their job to listen. It's their job to tell. And the better they are at teaching, the better they are at telling. My wife taught English for 37 years, and her true belief system is, why say in 5 words what you can say in 5,000? Now, again, it's not a bad thing, a good thing. It is what it is. She is who she is. And we need to work inside those parameters. I have some friends and colleagues that are in the audience today where they work a totally professional job in St. Paul, and drive in there and do that job, and then they go home and milk cows. The jobs aren't quite the same. The pay isn't quite the same. So how do we respect those people that do that? First, by identifying that they're doing it. I bet Meg knows I'm talking about her, doesn't she? So we have to focus on that. I was just told in a very subtle way I have 5 minutes left. So I have been told that questions and so on will come on the panel. Is that correct? So we can wait for those. But when I get done, if people have personal questions that they would like to ask me, I will be around all day, and I am more than happy to answer them. Don't be embarrassed or uncomfortable. I do that all the time. As a matter of fact, if I talk to a group and nobody asks me anything afterwards, I wonder what the hell I did wrong. So you're a good group. I'm really glad to see that this is going nationwide as far as working on and focusing on things. It makes us feel a whole lot better, us meaning people in the field. It makes us feel a whole lot better. There needs to be a whole lot more mental health people, and rural mental health is a specific area. By the way, if you work rural mental health, you have to do things like passing on the farm issues. Those are fun. When you have a family of 5 and the decision is, do we pass the farm on to one of the kids, or do we divide it by 5? And most people look at that and say, well, you know, if it's going to be a family farm, it's going to be a family farm. Now, first of all, you have to remember that nobody ever calls me in saying, this is going so smoothly, we thought we'd call you up. So I don't hear the easy ones. So the ones that are, I don't know about. But the ones that I work with, if you're one of the family members and you're going to get nothing, and the farm is, say, worth $5 million, well, that doesn't sound too fair to you. And if you're one of the kids, if you're the kid that's going to get the farm, if they pass on the farm, well, you can't divide it. You can't say, well, I'll give you blah, 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 because you can't divide a farm by 2 unless it's an incredibly large one. And again, if they're that big, they don't call me. So what do? Well, what mom and dads like to do is say, next year we're going to fix that. Next year we're going to talk about that. Next decade, I promise. Okay, the decade after that, but no later than that, and then they hope they die before they have to deal with it. Because it is not an easy situation. It's really hard. And so the easiest thing to do is nothing. And people can get really good at doing nothing. And then what happens? Well, then the ag lawyers say, hallelujah, praise the Lord, I'm going to make a ton of money now. Because that's what happens. They get into big fights. There is no right way. There is no good way. But the parents need to make a decision. Because if they don't, somebody else will make it for them, and I guarantee you it won't be as good. Nobody likes to be the bad guy, which is why parents don't like to make the decision. They don't want to be the bad guy. I understand that. But if they don't, bad things happen. I only have probably no time left, but I'm going to tell you a joke anyway. A farmer and lawyer are going to fly cross-country. And the lawyer looks at the farmer and he thinks, yeah, well, I'm going to have a little fun with this guy. So he says, I tell you what, I'm going to ask you a question, and if you can't answer it, you pay me $5. And then you can ask me a question, and if I can't answer it, I'll pay you $500. Farmer says, nah, I kind of just want to go to sleep. I don't want to deal with that stuff. And he said, no, this will be fun. Let's say, what's it going to cost you, you know? So the farmer finally says, all right, we'll do it. And so he says, okay, what's the distance between the Earth and the moon? And the farmer looks at him, he pulls out his wallet, takes out $5 and hands it to him. Lawyer chuckles a little bit, and he says, okay, now it's your turn. The farmer says, all right, what goes up a hill with 3 legs, goes down a hill with 4 legs? Well, the lawyer, pretty stumped, he's thinking, nothing. So he uses the phone in the plane, calls up Library of Congress, nothing, calls up his buddies, Googles it, nothing. Finally, he gives up, pulls out his wallet, takes out $500, hands it to the farmer. The farmer just smiles and puts it in his pocket, goes back to sleep. Well, they get just about to the airport, and the lawyer's just driving him nuts. So he wakes up the farmer and he says, you know, I just paid you $500, so for $500, what goes up a hill with 3 legs and goes down with 4? Farmer reaches in his wallet, takes out $5 and hands it to him. Thank you very much.